Greetings and salutations, my friends, and welcome to a new video. Is that going to become our norm? It looks like it may become our norm, but welcome to a new video, friends. I took a week-long break. You guys didn't notice because there were still videos going up and there was still a daily post going up on Patreon. However, I did take a week-long break. I sound sick after not being sick when I got better from being sick, and that's because I had one of the worst flare-ups I have had in almost a year now. So I am here. I am recuperated. The flare-up has been contained. It has been mitigated and minimized and stored elsewhere because it cannot be present. But today we are back with a new video, and today's video is our good old monthly wrap-up. We are here to talk about everything I read in May. I read a whopping 10 books, which for me is a lot. You guys know I take it very slow with my reading. I think recently it's kind of been picking up, not picking up. It kind of swings back and forth depending on the month and what I've got to do, but May was a surprisingly speedy month. I was reading quite a bit, loads of ups and downs, but I think overall the favorites that I did find were really good. Some of them, listen, some of them were just for the funsies. It doesn't matter, we'll get into it and let's chat all about it. Let's just get into everything I read in the month of May. And you know what? Today's video is brought to you by Skillshare, which I haven't worked with in so long, but I absolutely love them. If you guys need to know anything about me, is that I'm always looking to level up in the things that I already do. So if I'm talking productivity, I want to learn how to use Notion even better. If we're talking video making, I'm always looking for something new to incorporate into the videos, and that is where Skillshare comes in. Skillshare is the biggest online learning community for creatives, and they offer thousands of classes by industry experts so that you know that you are in good hands and that everything you'll end up learning comes from actual experience that is applied to that specific field. We're talking film, illustration, design, productivity, and so many other categories that you can browse on their website. Like I mentioned at the start of the video, I recently took a 1-week break, and my week-long breaks are typically used for several things. For resting, for learning, for replenishing that creative stock, and part of my break was spent into actually learning a thing or two based on things that I already do. So Ali Abdallah has a great class on Skillshare talking all about productivity and the workflow in Notion, which you guys know I use every single day. And then Marcus Brownlee also has a really great class called YouTube Success, which is all about scripting and editing and shooting your videos in a way that elevates the storytelling in the actual video itself. The first 500 people to use the link at the top of my description will get a month free of Skillshare so that you can get started on your learning journey today, so that you can take these last 6 months of 2024 by storm. Let's get into every single book I read in the month of May. Let us start out with the one book that I didn't vlog. I think for the most part, I vlogged every single book that I read in the month of May, except this one. But this is Butcher and Blackbird by Brynne Weaver. I really didn't know what to expect with this book when I was going into it, because the idea of two serial killers who off other serial killers becoming best friends and consequently becoming a couple of a kind, I did not know where that was going to go, how it was going to be executed. And I do think when it comes to these types of dark romances, it does require obviously a higher suspend of disbelief, just because you do have to kind of put morality aside because you know that what these characters are doing is not correct. The book is very campy, but not in a way that was off-putting. You guys know when it comes to campy books, I'm not the greatest fan, but I think it was handled, I guess, quite well. It reminded me of Scary Movie and these parody films back in the early 2000s in the way that a lot of that gore and a lot of that body horror comes in, and many of the ways that the other serial killers' lives end, whether it's by their hand or by consequence of what is happening in specific scenes. When I tell you it's campy, baby, it's sometimes very ridiculous, but it wasn't not enjoyable because of it. So in this one, we follow Sloane and Rowan, who are both rival murderers. They both off other serial killers, and they end up meeting because Sloane is at one of her quests, but she is trapped, and Rowan ends up finding her. And after meeting her, he's immediately taken by her. He thinks that she is so very attractive and that he can't just let this girl swing by him and not get to know her, not make a friendship out of this, because given their circumstances, it's very difficult to make friends, let alone actually date. And they also both have their respective careers outside of this. I think they have to, because otherwise how do you get paid, right? But she works in the medical field while he is a chef. So actually, if you want a book that features cooking in any way, way, this has it. And it's actually very prominently displayed in the plot with his restaurants and with him teaching her how to cook and going about all of these like cutesy things. It's a very strange book because for the thematic of it, it is so strangely wholesome. And he offers a little challenge that every single year they will meet and they will compete to basically off a different serial killer every single year. And best 2 out of 3 will win the whole challenge or something along those lines. And she agrees because she thinks that it's not only a way to scratch the itch, but also as a means to actually make a friend that isn't the only friend that she already has. Again, the book is strangely wholesome. It features loads of things in the culinary aspect that, again, I did not expect. You do get to see these characters' lives outside of the context of them serial murdering people. Surprisingly, I really enjoyed the way that the author navigated all of them meeting, getting to know each other, to then them starting to date and getting together and being really intimate with each other. The book has these small time jumps sometimes, if not bigger time jumps. I'm talking sometimes it'd be 1 year, 6 months, 3 months. It really depends where we're at in the book that the time jumps or it doesn't. But I quite like that she did that because it definitely gives the reader, I think, enough time to settle into the idea of they haven't known each other for 3 seconds and now they're banging. They've actually known each other for a really long time now. They have yearned for each other. There's a lot of tension, there's a lot of chemistry, there's a lot of banter, and it's done really, really well. And this chemistry is not something that jumps out of the story immediately from the get-go as they meet. You can tell that it's something that develops through time, even though the initial attraction is very much there. That romantic chemistry definitely develops over months and years of them getting to know each other and texting more and calling and FaceTiming and meeting up and kind of going about it the wrong way. And I really love that their relationship has sort of this learning curve to it for them to figure out how they want to manage this, how they want to be together or not be together. And so I think the development of events in the book made the relationship seem a lot more real, which again was very surprising. And I overall just had a good time. I think if you want a book just for the shits and the giggles, you don't want to think too much, it's kind of like a no thoughts head empty kind of book, I would say this could be a good time. I even annotated it. Listen, when I say I had a good time, I had a good time, and I can't wait to read Leather and Lark. Butcher and Blackbird was a surprising surprise and it was a good time, so I gave it 5 stars. I think I'm seeing a pattern. The Mindfuck series, this, I like it. A book I was conflicted with the entire way through was Indigo Ridge by Daphne Perry. Another one that I read because I was super curious about it, and everybody seems to rave about the Indigo. Well, I guess it's not called the Indigo Ridge series, the Eden series. I always forget what this is called, but everybody raves about this. Everybody's like, oh my god, you have to read it. It's this mystery investigative romance, and it's all around a really good time. I initially wanted to read Juniper Hill, which is the second book, but I thought, let's go back in the series and read the first one, see if I enjoy it, then go into Juniper Hill, because Juniper Hill is a single parent romance, and everybody was like, oh yeah, right up your alley, you're going to love it. And while I don't regret reading Indigo Ridge before it, I do think it was well to read this first so that I could set expectations accordingly, because this ended up being a 3-star, kind of middle of the road, very average. And I think my main issue with this was the romance, surprisingly. But we follow Winslow and Griffin. Winslow is somewhat new to town. Her family does originate from Quincy, Montana, and her granddad is actually the mayor of the town. He contacts her. He's like, hey, I know you want a fresh start. What happens if you come over here? I actually make you chief of police. It's not unearned. She's got a great track record, so it's not just a handout. It's definitely something that she has earned through time with her work in other departments. And so she says yes, she gets there, she becomes new chief of police, and she ends up meeting Griffin at a bar. She thinks that he is an outsider, just somebody passing by. He also thinks that of her because they both ask each other that. They're not very transparent, and there is a bout of miscommunication in that first meeting, and so they end up hooking up, only to realize that they both are residents in this town, and they really didn't want to sleep with a resident. And so as she gets on that first meeting with the Edens, which are the founding family of said town, she sees Griffin for the first time, and he sees her, and the tension skyrockets, and things go from there as she has to investigate a set of murders that has gone down, or what she believes to be a set of murders that have gone down in his property specifically, and that in itself is the story, the plot, and the romance. It's advertised as an enemies to lovers, which I do take issue with, because there is nothing antagonistic or enemies-wise in their dynamic. The only thing that seems to lead to that enemies element is the fact that she is an outsider, or he considers her to be one, and he believes that that she doesn't belong in town. But whilst he is very vocally not nice to her in that regard, they still hook up with each other plenty of times as his whole kind of standoffishness towards her takes place. And there's a dissonance, I think, in what is being said and what is being done. And it is never explicitly said that they hate each other, that there's any real animosity. To advertise this as an enemies to lovers is so very unfair. I wouldn't even call this hate to love because they hook up. We don't see it because the book is very much closed door in that regard, but they hook up right as the book starts, and then they keep doing so. And the reason why they keep going back to each other, it's not because of the investigation at first or anything, it's just because they don't want to give up that physical connection. And then they do end up seeing each other more and more because of the investigation that they are both involved in, and then it develops the more you go along. I think the first half of the story, if not the first 2/3 of the story, don't do a well enough job at getting these characters to really know each other and to really display their chemistry in a way that feels real, while the last third, I think, does provide some semblance of, oh, let me share personal facts about myself, let me mention this about my life and this about this happening, and it doesn't do it a whole lot for it to feel too real, but it does so enough to make me go, okay, we got a little bit of it, and if I have to accept crumbs, then I will. So I don't think that the romance was that well developed, which was frustrating. It was still an enjoyable time. You guys already know this is a favorite series of mine, and that is Spy Family. This is volume 11. This is the latest volume that came out. I bought it, I read it, I loved it. This was definitely a 5-star for me, and Spy Family has been kind of up and down, even though it is a favorite, and that happens with manga. You know, certain volumes are going to be more exciting than others. I think this manga series specifically, there are definitely points of views or certain storylines that I don't care for as much, but anytime I get something that's Anya-centric and that she is at the forefront of the story and the conflict and all of the madness ensuing, I absolutely love that, and this had it all. So Spy Family, for those of you who don't know, features Twilight as one of our main characters. He is a spy, and he is tasked with Operation Strix. Operation Strix is a means to ensure peace between the two nations that are currently at conflict in this world, and in order to go about that mission very successfully, he has to enlist the help of a fake family. So he ends up getting a wife and a daughter and further a dog, but that's like further along in the story. What he doesn't know is that the wife is an assassin, the daughter is a telepath, and the dog can see the future. So he's collecting them all like Infinity Stones at this point, and the only one who's aware of everybody's abilities is obviously the daughter, given her specific talents. And the whole reason why he needs a family is because he needs to get Anya, the daughter, into a super prestigious school in order to befriend the son of one of the biggest, most important councilmen in their country in order to get into his good graces potentially and go about his mission, again, smoothly and successfully. It is so far neither smooth nor successful in a lot of routes, because against his best wishes, Anya and Damien end up becoming enemies and they really hate each other, and she's trying her absolute best to help with the mission, but because she's a kid and she is so young, a lot of the time she ends up messing up. And in this particular volume, we have got an abduction, we have got characters attempting to sacrifice themselves for the better sake of the world and of their classmates. We have got the elegance professor making a really selfless appearance, which I absolutely love. We just overall get a ton of action and tension and goofiness as always in this volume, and I loved it. This volume was so very good, and I think it was a great step up from volume 10 that I gave, I think, 3 or 2 stars to, I can't remember. So this one was definitely a really good one. It was a great time, made me laugh several times. This next one was a letdown, I'm not gonna lie. I was super disappointed with this book. I wanted to love it, and it was still an enjoyable time to an extent, and it was still very accessible for the subgenre and the aesthetic it fits in, but I didn't love it nearly as much as I wanted to, and that is An Education in Malice by S.T. Gibson. It is a Carmilla retelling, it is a dark academia, and it also obviously features a sapphic romance. Out of those 3, what I think was done the best was the sapphic romance. I think S.T. Gibson absolutely nailed that. I can't speak on the retelling vibes because I have not read Carmilla yet. I do own it, but I haven't read it yet. And for the dark academia, I think there are certain aspects that S.T. Gibson really nailed, like the facts that we actually do see the characters in class, we do see the academic portion of the dark academia, and we do see the descent into madness afterwards. However, what I don't think she nails is necessarily the atmosphere. I think the atmosphere was really lacking for a subgenre genre and aesthetic that really relies on its atmosphere to really build up everything else, and that aspect to me was really lacking. Picture this, our main character, Laura Sheridan. She gets to St. Perpetua's College. She immediately realizes that this school is unlike anything she has seen before, because on her very first day of class, she ends up meeting Carmilla, somebody who clearly displays a lot of academic prowess. She seems very smart, very applied, and an overall extremely smart person. However, she does seem to be further in the confidence of the poetry professor than maybe she should be, and that is displayed even in class, which Laura finds strange. However, as this academic rivalry between the two of them gets stronger, and she is also drawn into the confidence of Professor de la Fontaine, she realizes that things are actually quite dark. There is a romance brewing between her and Carmilla, so it's not just the rivalry element of it all. It obviously features vampires and the undead and secret societies, and that aspect I think was also very well done. However, atmosphere lacking right off the get-go, which was very disappointing, because if there's something that I really enjoy about Dark Academia, it is that aesthetic and atmosphere that makes me feel claustrophobic and tense, and that every second is just waiting for something worse to happen. The book was very much lacking that, in my opinion. And then on top of that, and I don't know if that was intentional or not, but I don't feel like we went nearly deep enough into all of the problems in the relationship between Carmilla and Professor de la Fontaine. I genuinely was expecting a lot more when it came to exploring all of those dynamics and really denouncing this type of relationship and the dynamic that they have. I do think there are elements in that relationship that S.T. Gibson handles quite nicely. It's mostly dealt in subtleties though. So it's these one-liners that are provided throughout the story, like, oh, Carmilla, why are you thinking about humans? They're so disposable. They are not made for vampires. And coming from somebody like Ms. D, who definitely sweeps these two characters into her confidence, but Carmilla most prominently, as a means to consume her body and dictate what Carmilla should and shouldn't be doing, it definitely leaves it very clear what Carmilla means to her, but that's also at a dissonance with what Ms. D displays throughout the story, because it definitely seems like Ms. D cares more than she should for a thematic specifically that should have some sort of power imbalance and a lot of gaslighting and a lot of lying, and so that aspect to me was very frustrating. There also was a side plot which ended up being part of the bigger plot of the story that was, I think, taking away from the main narrative, because with or without it, it doesn't really make a difference, and I think the story would have been so much more powerful if we didn't get that aspect of Ms. D's backstory and plot and how that whole thing shows up in the story versus what we could have gotten if the story was just focal pointing onto Carmilla, Ms. D, and Laura. Really, the two aspects of this book that I really enjoyed were the sapphic romance. I think it was done wonderfully. I think the chemistry between Laura and Carmilla was absolutely elite, and the more that you go along in the book, the better it gets. I do think the way that we get into them admitting that they like each other made no sense, so mind that. But overall, it was done incredibly well. And the other thing I liked about it was the fact that although it's a Dark Academia, it's a very accessible one, which kind of also goes at a dissonance with my opinion that it didn't have enough description and atmosphere and all these different things. That's just me personally, what I would have liked, but I think that for people who enjoy Dark Academia books or think that they could enjoy them but have never read one, I do think it could be a good entry point toward it, because it's not as overwhelming as some other Dark Academic books that reside in the market, and it also doesn't have nearly as many triggering elements as some other books may contain. That's kind of that on An Education in Malice. It was a letdown, but at least it was enjoyable and a quick read, but 3 stars for it. It was very frustrating. Guess who read her first Bridgerton book? Hello! I read Romancing Mr. Bridgerton in May, and it was actually a surprising journey for me. I also thought this was middle of the road. I also gave it 3 stars. Can you tell that this month was plagued by 3 stars? It was a lot, okay? I was expecting to find loads more 5-star books, and I didn't. It was very up and down, but thankfully not lower than a 3-star, which was, I think, a win in and of itself. However, I did read Romancing Mr. Bridgerton. This is the 4th book. I always want to say it's the 3rd book because of the 3rd season, but it's actually the 4th one. And in this one, we follow Colin and Penelope's story as people who have known each other since childhood and slowly but surely develop some sort of romantic connection that then leads them to date and go about their romantic endeavors afterwards. Penelope has had the biggest crush on Colin. In fact, it is mentioned right at the start of the book that the first time that she realizes that she likes him or could be in love with him, she feels like it's reciprocated, and then it isn't, and then the next year it isn't, and the year after that it also isn't, and now it's been 10 years since her starting to like him. She is is now 28 years old and still nothing comes of this connection. I think the book definitely makes it clear as opposed to the show, because I think the dynamics are somewhat different in their nature. The book makes it very clear that whilst her and Colin are friendly, they are friendly by consequence because she is friends with his sister Eloise, except that when he comes back from his travels, he went traveling to Cyprus, he starts realizing slowly but surely, like, oh, Penelope's kind of cute. Was she always this cute? Was she always this interesting? She's kind of starting to look a little bit different, but has she always looked like that? And have I just noticed? So I do like that the realizations come kind of staggered in a way that makes it feel so much more realistic, because if you've ever liked one of your friends, if you've ever liked somebody that you've known for a time, it definitely seems that way. It's like, oh, have the eyes always been this blue? Has the hair always been that brown? Has the smile always looked like that? Because you really start questioning yourself and your sanity when you start realizing these things slowly but surely. And so I think in that aspect, this book was really enjoyable. Seeing him really grovel for her attention and really start to get pissy when she's around other people and not around him, I really enjoyed that whole element. I obviously love the fact that Penelope has a backbone, that she's not afraid to speak her mind, that she's not afraid to be witty and sarcastic and funny and to show her personality. And I think at this point in time in the book series, it makes a lot of sense because she's no longer a teenager. She hasn't just entered the ton. She has now achieved spinster status. She's been single for such a long time. And when she does speak her mind and when she does stand her ground, it doesn't come from a place of this fake bravado or this sense of recklessness because she's so young. It happens because she's seasoned and now she's older, which I also quite enjoyed. However, the book is really not that exciting. It's very slow going. The characters, while they do have chemistry, I find that the chemistry was still somewhat lacking. I liked them separately, but when it came to them together, I didn't particularly love it all. I wasn't swooning and fanning myself because it was so tense and so juicy and so good. It was just bland. And even though the characters do have defining elements in their personalities, still as characters, they are bland. As individual people, they are bland, which by consequence means that when they get together, they are bland. They're just not together. And Colin has a lot of anger issues in this book. He has quite a temper, which I was not expecting and I did also not like. And he has a thing with boundaries. Allegedly, you didn't hear from me. But in the book, Penelope makes it very clear several times that she's either uncomfortable or it's going too fast because she, even though is, you know, in her late 20s, she's never really done a whole lot because it's the 1800s, baby. Of course she's not gonna do a whole lot if not married. And even though she vocalizes her discomfort and her, hey, maybe not right now, or hey, stop, I feel uncomfy, he doesn't stop. And that made me very uncomfortable. And that happened basically at every single one of their more intimate scenes. But I didn't like that at all. I found myself kind of cringing away from the book when those scenes came up, just because by her being uncomfortable and her boundaries being disregarded made me in turn uncomfortable. It was just not a great time on any of those ends, but I think the highlight of this book for me, randomly so, but maybe not so much because she is one of my favorite characters in the show as well. Her interactions with Lady Danbury were absolutely incredible in this book. I absolutely loved it, and that was kind of the experience. Like, it was okay, which I was expecting it to be, and so it was okay. That's all I gotta say. It was a 3-star. It was okay. It does look up though, because we do have a 4-star, and that was Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. Now, this one was a strange kind of book, but not an unenjoyable one. I said in the vlog that I read this in that it's kind of hard to pitch this book on its own without comparing it to other things or without over-explaining what the book is about so that you get a clear picture of what the book will deliver. This book was pitched to me as super exciting and creepy and horror-y and extra disturbing and extra griefy, and the relationship between the two main characters is awesome. And while I do agree with some of those descriptors, I don't agree with all of them. I wouldn't call this book creepy or thrilling or overly exciting or adventurous or disturbing too much. Like, there are certain aspects of disturbingness in the story, but not so much that it plagues the story, if you know what I mean. So in Our Wives Under the Sea, we follow the story of Miri and Leah, who are a married couple. They've been married for some time, and Leah goes on a sea expedition that very quickly goes wrong. They checked all of the equipment, the actual vessel, the submarine, everything in it, and everything was working extremely fine. As they are descending, everything's working incredibly fine, and then suddenly everything shuts down. Everything is working fine still, but it's not working the way that it should. And as they are adrift at the bottom of the sea, they keep wondering wondering exactly where things went wrong because there doesn't seem to be anything wrong. So why are we in this very strange situation? And 6 months go by of her and her crew adrift at the bottom of the sea, and then she comes back home. However, she comes back home changed. She is not quite the same Leah that left on that sea expedition, and it is very clear that something strange, abnormal, and unsettling happened while she was there that now Miri has to deal with on an everyday basis. The whole book is essentially a closer look into grief and a relationship that is reaching its inevitable end. We know right from the get-go that the story can only end in a single way, and that Miri, as somebody who holds a lot of rage towards Leah at the start of the book, rage for leaving her, rage for going missing for 6 months, rage for leaving on that sea expedition to begin with, rage for returning the way that she did, rage for not being able to communicate the way that she used to, rage for not explaining what happened while she was gone, rage for the fact that she doesn't seem to love Miri anymore, whilst also being mad and sort of from the get-go grieving the relationship that they used to have before Leah went on that sea expedition. And so based on all of those things, you already know there's a single ending, right? This can't end well. And so the entire book is looking at this relationship whilst narrating how they met, how they got together, what everybody's reactions and their friends and family were when they did get together and when they did marry, to then finding out through Leah's POV what actually happened when she was at sea, the things that she saw, the things that she experienced, the things that disturb her still to this day and that lend themselves to the living conditions she has to have now that she's back home, and these coping mechanisms that come up time and time again that we as readers understand why they take place, but Miri as the wife doesn't, because she hasn't been explained these things, because Leah can't vocalize it. And so as we descend through this journey of getting to understand this couple, getting to understand Leah, and by consequence learning to understand where they're at right now and why things are not working anymore, we see that they are together by responsibility and some sense of loyalty and still a lot of love, even though it's masked by all of these other things happening. And it's very frustrating to, as a reader, I think, read from Leah's POV and understand, and you almost kind of want to shout back to Miri, like, these are the things that happened, like, these are the things that are happening right now, and I just wish you would understand. But when you're so closed off during that time and you're only thinking about how everything's not working and you're reminiscing about what was and you're trying to reconcile that person that was and the relationship that was with the person that is in the relationship that is, and you're so deep into your head that you can't see things clearly anymore, this current version of events and people that you have in your life suddenly feels like some sort of caricature. It was just such a frustrating book on so many different elements, but such a different one. You get that whole element of grief into this relationship whilst also observing Miri's relationship with grief from when her mother passed, and you get outside elements and forces and characters that also contribute to the ongoing frustration in this relationship, how third-party opinions can deeply affect how the household kind of goes on a day-to-day basis. It was a very real depiction, I think, of a situation like this, maybe in a more unconventional setting given the circumstances, but it was a really good journey. I think it was a really great look, a very intimate one as well, into these characters and the way that it all wraps up into this almost reckoning of love and acceptance, but also overwhelming grief, was so well done. So I gave it a 4-star. I could even dare say, depending on the day that you ask me, it could be a 5-star, so like, it depends. I think my gripe with this book is the fact that it was so slow, and at times it seems like we were going nowhere, but overall, I think it was good. I think if I did reread this and annotate this, which I do want to do at some point in time because so many great passages in here, I think if I were to reread it and annotate it, maybe I'd give it a 5-star, but as of right now, I'll settle with a 4. Another 5-star this month was The Fake Maid by Lana Ferguson. I'm actually quite surprised at the fact that we only really have 2 5-star books and then 2 5-star mangas, which I guess counts for about 4, but I was expecting to have more. However, The Fake Maid was a really good one. This was my first Lana Ferguson book, and I definitely don't want it to be my last. This features an Omegaverse romance, so we do have a romance between 2 werewolves, particularly an alpha and an omega, if that's your cup of tea as much as it is mine, because this was a great time. And both of these werewolves, Mackenzie and Noah, work at a hospital. She's She's an ER doctor while he is an interventional cardiologist, and their circumstances for fake dating are very, very different. Hers is that her grandma keeps asking, when are you gonna find your mate? When are you gonna settle down? When are you gonna get serious about a relationship and having kids and building your domestic life? And Mackenzie wants nothing to do with that. In fact, she has sworn off love because of her many bad experiences with dates and blind dates and going out to meet different people. She is consistently objectified for being an omega because everybody thinks that her sense of pleasure in the bedroom will be higher than anybody else, and that also contributes to the reason why she hides being an omega so much, because she hates the fact that this is a constant in her life. And Noah, on the flip side, also hides the fact that he's an alpha, because people have this taboo that an unmated alpha is extremely dangerous and aggressive and dominant and possessive and all these different things that aren't really conducive to a great workspace. And so when the board at the hospital realizes that he is an alpha because somebody gave him away, he has to pretend that he is actually mated to somebody, anybody that will agree to his terms, so that he's not kicked off the hospital and fired for being an alpha. And so because of their two specific circumstances, they decide, hey, we could actually really help each other out. What happens if we pretend to be together, to be mated, and that way we get people off our backs and we'll just have to kind of fake date in very specific circumstances and really perform for the people. But otherwise, we really don't have to interact with each other or really do anything with each other because it's for mutual interest and for our own sense of self-gain. And they both say yes, they both agree, but it is very quickly realized that they actually have a lot more chemistry than they realized. And that in itself poses a danger, friends, because now we're going into maybe I do want to be in a relationship territory, which is not something they had contemplated before. And let me tell you, the chemistry was real in this one. I mentioned this also in the vlog that I read this in. I typically am really bothered, like Indigo Ridge, for example, which I mentioned earlier. I really want to see the characters get to know each other. I want to see those gritty, intimate details of what makes them who they are, whether it's the backstory of their family and how they were raised, or something that happened in their previous relationship, or something that happened at the workplace. I really want to see the ins and outs of what makes a character them. And while this book had some aspects of that, it wasn't at the forefront of the story. There are many instances where I kind of caught myself and I was like, wait, the chemistry is really good and things are flowing really nicely, but they haven't even shared a singular, really personal fact about them. So why do I feel like they've known each other for ages? And I realized very quickly then that I really didn't mind the fact that they didn't seem to know each other that personally. And it is because when it comes to acts of service, when it comes to giving to somebody else and spending that quality time, the book does have that. And it does have those very small, again, acts of service of, I brought you food because I know you wouldn't eat lunch if I didn't fetch you food, or I did this for you because I know this about you. And I think because that sense of familiarity does come up throughout the book time and time again, it definitely made me think in turn that the characters knew each other better than they probably did. And I didn't mind it at all. I actually had a really good time. I think also because of the circumstances of the Omegaverse dynamic, it definitely makes up somewhat for that lack of personal knowing each other, because the very nature of these two characters getting together seems to be a somewhat biological response, whilst also maybe some faded stuff out in the universe. The book doesn't leave that to be very clear whether it's one or the other because it talks about both. So I didn't really understand a whole lot of it in that aspect, but I also didn't mind it. I was just letting myself get carried away, and maybe that's the thirsty bitch in me, but I really liked it. And so when you get into that Omegaverse dynamic of, I am here for you, I am here to make sure that you are doing good, that you feel good, that you get that comfort and release that you need. I am here to make sure that my partner is always feeling the best that they can because that is my job. And I think that was so well done and well executed in this book in ways that some of the other romances I have read even lack. And so for all that it lacked, other things made up for it. Two more manga volumes that I read in May that reside in the same series is A Man and His Cat Volume 2, which I rated 5 stars, and A Man and His Cat Volume 3, which I rated 4 stars. Again, it always happens with manga series that the more you go along, there will be hit and miss volumes, and Volume 3 was definitely not my favorite out of the 3 that I have read, but it was still a good and wholesome time. We follow the story of an elderly man who ends up adopting a cat because of his late wife's wishes. She always seemed to get a lot of joy from cats and pets, and he vowed that he'd basically help her get and adopt a cat. She passed before that was able to happen, and now he is fulfilling that wish to not only make that aspect be completed, but to also give himself the company that he desperately needs. he feels very lonely, and in many ways he feels like life has lost its purpose, and getting a cat has definitely revitalized his love of life. He feels like he gets home and he's got something to do, he has got purpose, he has got somebody to talk to, and even though the cat obviously cannot respond, at least in ways he has got company. And then on the flip side, we also get to see the cat's POV and the cat's internal monologue as the cat is adopted, is brought into this new home, and gets the love it deserves. The cat is an older cat, and it faced a lot of difficulty when trying to get adopted. A lot of people would actually bully the cat because of its appearance, and even when the man, and I say the man and his cat interchangeably because I literally cannot remember their names, but he was told, like, are you sure you really want this cat? We've got kittens, we've got cuter ones, smaller ones, skinnier ones, playful ones. This one, I don't know if it's gonna be the vibe for you. And I love that the story focuses on adopting an adult cat because, listen, don't we know, if you know anything about adoption of pets in general, then you'd know that it's immensely difficult to get people to adopt older, maybe elderly, adult, what have you, pets, whether it's a dog or a cat, because they want to go through the cute stages of a puppy or a kitten, and there's nothing wrong with that, but these pets deserve love too. And so I love that the focus of the story heads into that, and now he is just absolutely in love with life and the cat and everything to do with everyday living, which in turn makes the manga so very wholesome. And the story is told in these episodic sort of vignettes, and I love that it's told that way because it showcases the most monumental moment into this new relationship and the most significant moments of both of their lives, instead of doing something that feels more linear and structured. So I like the fact that we just kind of get these small bits and pieces as we go. I think in turn it also makes it much more wholesome. So I like this a lot. It was a great time. And last but not least, we have got What the River Knows by Isabel Ibanez, a book that I was so very excited to read. I thought I was gonna give this 5 stars, and then I did not. I ended up going for also a 3-star. Again, I was plagued by 3 stars in the month of May, but it was still a fun book. And that I will say about all of the 3 stars I read in June, they were 3 stars, but at least they were fun and the vibes vibed where they needed to. And this is definitely a very vibey book. So we follow the story of Inés, who lives in Buenos Aires, born and raised there, and her parents have been going back and forth between Cairo and Buenos Aires whilst residing mostly in Cairo for their different excavation investigative pursuits. And whilst Inés lives her entire life in Buenos Aires, she is yearning to be over there with her parents, not only to see what their life looks like over there, but to also engage in a lot of the things that they are doing because she finds it immensely interesting as well. One day she gets a letter though from her uncle basically claiming that her parents have gone missing and therefore declared dead because they can't find them. However, Inés does not take that because Girly Pop jumps on a ship by herself pretending to be a widow, and she goes to the other end of the world to Egypt to really investigate what happened to her parents because she'll take none of that. And when she gets there, she ends up meeting her uncle's assistant, Whitford Hayes, who is also her love interest, an ex-British military that seems to do her uncle's dirty job in a lot of the investigation that needs to ensue in order for all of these expeditions, excavations, etc. to happen smoothly. And baby, let me tell you, the chemistry between Inés and Whit really did slay me away. It was so freaking good. Against Whit's best wishes, probably. He cares about Inés a lot more than he cares to admit, and she's very straightforward with the I actually quite like you. I kind of hate the fact that I do, but I really do like you and I have to make that known. And I love that she does that. I love that she's not afraid to come up and say, you're kind of attractive. I hate that. Did I mention that I hate that? Because I do, but you're kind of fucking hot and I kind of want to at least try things out and see where it goes. So I like that she's very straightforward with that throughout the entirety of the narrative since the first moment where that happens. Their romance, their chemistry, their bouts of interaction, I think was one of the strongest suits in this book. I also think the way that Isabel Ibanez handled the entire expedition, let's find more about ancient Egypt history, and all of the commentary on colonialism, I think that was really well done. The book does not shy away from mentioning time and time again that as Inés gets there, what she primarily sees is British and French people, and it is very clear as the story goes along that these specific groups of people are there to go go about these expeditions to get all of these ancient items to either resell on a sort of market, if not a black market, or to actually get them for museums without anybody's permission. You know, el visto bueno, you can actually do that, and how outside institutions or governments or different countries are willing to get to a place and reap it for all that it can sow against the countries and land's well wishes. And I love that the book talks about that, because that's been a huge topic of conversation for these past few years, not only with several international museums, but specifically, because the book does mention British a lot, the British Museum, because I don't think any of us are real strangers to that specific conversation where things are excavated and they should be put back and then they're not. And I also found it super fascinating, which I also really liked, that the wide picture of the plot really seems to focus on finding Cleopatra's tomb, which ancient Egypt history does say that she said that no man would ever find her tomb. And so that seems to be the most exciting element of this story when it comes to, again, the expeditions and whatnot, which I really quite enjoyed. Things that I didn't really love about the book were the magic system, which you'll notice in my praise of the book has been missing so far, but magic is a part of the plot. It is a fantasy book. We get mentions that objects oftentimes get magical residue in them, and depending on the person that touches it, they may be able to harness the magic, use the magic, sense the magic, get images and visions from the magic. And at one point it is basically kind of alluded to the fact that Inez is able to do that, and she is very unique for being able to do that, while later on in the story it is mentioned that it is a very common thing that everybody's able to do that. So I think as far as a magic system goes, it was very confusing. It seemed kind of scattered to me, and it didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense because of the way that it was fleshed out. I think there was just so much happening in the book that some things were kind of taking a backseat when they definitely seemed more important to me. Also, another thing that I didn't really love about the book was the theme of grief and loss. Again, the book is very chaotic. There are so many things happening. We're jumping from place to place, from mission to mission, from banter to banter, and there is just so much happening that these very important scenes that are literally super important for the main character, they kind of get glossed over so that we can jump into the next thing. And sometimes it seems like they are not given the importance that they should. And I get that it's somewhat intentional because there are so many things happening at once and we don't have quite a single moment to settle into it so that we can feel it all. But I do wish, just because it was such a huge thing in the book, that it was felt just a little bit more, because things are happening so quick that even as a reader, I don't have time to process everything. So I found it very frustrating in that aspect. So I think the book really suffers in its flow, it suffers in its magic system, and it also suffers from some of its thematic. And so I bumped it down to a 3-star, even though I thought it'd be rated higher, but it was still a good time overall. And I'm very excited about the second book. I think it's called Where the Library Hides or something along those lines. I think it's that title. And I'm really excited because I didn't realize it was coming out this year. So can't wait for that. And that is it, friends. This is everything that I read in the month of May. I hope you guys enjoyed this wrap up. If you did, don't forget to give it a massive thumbs up down below. And as always, let a girl know, what did you guys read in the month of May? Any favorites, any DNFs, any new hateful reads that you want to share with the class? Have you read any of the books that are clearly falling that I mentioned in this video? Let a girl know if you've read any of these. I'd love to know you guys' thoughts on these as well. Let us leave some bird emojis for Butcher and Blackbird if you did get to the end of the video. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't done so already for more content like this. And if you guys want to support the channel further, I always say it, Patreon is the way to go to help run things smoothly. And you also get extra content and live shows and a book club if you do decide to pledge. That is always linked down below alongside the rest of my social medias. Again, thank you so much to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. Don't forget that for the first 500 people that click on that link, you will be getting a month free of Skillshare. That'll be linked at the top of the description. I love you guys so much, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye!